You already know that using stories in your leadership is a powerhouse of an effective tool if you want to make better connections, but you don't know how. Because when you hear story, you think, I have to make this up, or like I'm writing a novel or something. Like, what does this require of me? Well, today, I'm going to give you the principles of storytelling. Some of the principles that I would walk through with any of my clients regarding how to use stories to become a stronger leader and communicate better. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Sam Linton Show, the podcast designed to help you shift your mindset, find your voice, and change your world. Sam is a pastor, coach, and expert communicator, helping leaders and entrepreneurs like you step into their purpose, speak with confidence, and make a lasting difference. So let's dive in.
All right. So, a couple things. I am overjoyed at our podcast because I don't talk about this a lot. I'm not a good celebrator, but we've surpassed well over 1,000 downloads, and we're actually heading into 1,500. It seems like it's exponentially picking up. I don't ask a lot. I would love if you would subscribe and rate and review this on whatever platform you're listening to it to, because we're like 40 some episodes deep at this point, and I can't believe it's been that long. But I'm learning a lot because I get to regurgitate things that I realize are important and helpful to you. And my prayer is that this is making you a more effective leader and a more effective communicator. So if it is, just write me, podcast@samuellinton.com. Let me know a highlight. I'd love to feature a comment that you made. That would be great. Also, I have some really exciting things in the future for 2026. You'll hear about it more, but I have some things that I'm cooking, some ideas that I'm working on that might help you with your speaking even more, in addition to coaching. So if you are really into this podcast, just know that I'm always working on the next thing. There's always something else. So my wife always says that there's always going to be something else, and there is. So thank you for being here. Now, when I just told you that story about my wife, that was a story. It was mundane. Her telling me, oh, there's always something else, that's a story. Because it's a personal story about my life that may or may not have a connection to you. But what I did right there is I used that little story of her saying, oh, there's always something else, as a way to get you more engaged and made it about you. So I think one of the things that a lot of executives sleep on when it comes to really connecting to their people is telling personal stories. And the reason why is because personal stories tend not to be data heavy. They tend not to be extremely practically outliney or useful. Like if you listen to a story about me and my wife having a marital spat, or how I prepare chicken on Thanksgiving instead of turkey, or how I was able to fix my son's Lego, there's not going to be 5 steps in there that are going to help you to be a better executive. But you're missing the superpower of stories, because stories are capable of way more than what you realize. And every story has multiple applications that you can use to become a better leader and to show the people that you're leading that you are more authentic. So I want to give you some of these considerations to tell you, if I haven't already told you, why telling stories, and especially personal stories as a leader, will help you. So the first is, stories bypass all of the logic that you have to go through, and they connect to emotion. Almost always. Even in the little story, my wife said there's always another thing. There's a little emotion there. Your wife has probably said something to you. Oh, you're going to go buy another gun? Oh, you're going to go hunting again? Oh, you're going to go and look at go to the car show? Or, your spouse, your husband, oh, really, another trip to Target? Another trip to Kohl's? I know these are both kind of sexist examples, but you feel that because you identify with that. And what I did is I bypassed giving you a logical progression, and I made you arrive at an emotional place. And emotion connects people to action. You don't want to divorce emotion from action. So you have to realize that stories are a way to shortcut some of the heavy lifting that you have to do when you're explaining things. Next of all, your team, for the most part, isn't going to remember principles. They're going to remember moments. I'll give you an example. We had a staff meeting probably at the beginning of this year, maybe even at the end of last year. I can't quite remember. At the church. And the pastor, the lead pastor, is a boomer, and he's in his 60s. And we were talking about current events, and this was, I think, right after Puff Daddy, got arrested and indicted. And we were talking about this, just current events and the atrocities and of the accusations leveled against Diddy. And the pastor, the boomer pastor, Pastor Mike, he said in the meeting, "Oh, I know all about this. 50 Cent hates Diddy's guts." Well, that was it. We lost it for like 10 minutes. 50 cents. He called them cents, like the actual pennies in your drawer. 50 Cent hates Diddy's guts. So he'd been watching YouTube videos or Instagram reels about how there's this animosity between 50 Cent and Diddy, which is very real because, fun fact, 50 Cent is releasing in the upcoming year a documentary, an expose of Diddy that he produced. So really funny on that. But secondly, it was just funny in that moment that he brought this up, and we all laughed about it, and we talk about it still because it was a moment. And did it do anything? Not really, except for it galvanized in our minds that we enjoy this kind of banter. It's part of the secret sauce. And so if you remember every single detail of every single meeting, you're a unicorn. But you will remember the moments that mattered most to you. You'll remember laughing. You'll remember getting emotional. You'll remember those things long after the task you're meeting about is over. So teams don't remember principles, they remember moments. Now, the third reason, and this one is gold. Your life is an absolute content reservoir of stories that you can use to become a better leader. Let me say it again. A content reservoir. You have an ocean of stories, some of them good, some of them bad, some of them weird, some of them indifferent. These stories are all at your fingertips now. Only you can access them. They're only yours because you've experienced them. And we leave them on the table because they're not data heavy. We remove them because nobody's ever talked like this before. I want to tell you that today, I want you to start thinking about every experience you've ever had, good or bad, as an opportunity for you to lead better and communicate better with stories. So, I'm going to give you some principles. These principles are not set in stone, but these principles will help you to better appeal to your team or your audience with the right attitude when it comes to stories. Principle number 1, don't always play the hero. This is one of the hesitations I have of telling executives to use stories like this because if you might not know this or not, if you're an executive leader or if you have dealt with an executive leader, you struggle with insecurity. A lot of the highest driven, highest capacity folks that you know deal a lot with insecurity in themselves. And you're like, how could that be? They're making the most money. They're doing the most things. They've started the most businesses. They built the most infrastructure. I know. But inside the pursuit of all of those things, a lot of times there's a wound. A father wound, a mother wound, some sort of longing where they wanted to be more than what they are. I know that one of the reasons why I do so many different things, podcasts, coaching, writing novels, pastoring, so many different things, is because I have an unsettledness in my spirit that never left me from when I was a child. It was always there. It always will be there. I've made peace with it. God has used it. But at times it makes me really freaking miserable, if I'm being honest. And a lot of the success that I've realized, that God has given me, allowed me to realize, has come as a result of that unmet thing, that insecurity. And so I'm conscious when I'm feeling insecure, and I try to be self-aware enough to know, but some leaders are not. So when they go to tell a story, they will paint themselves as the hero. The hero. Donald Miller, in his book, Building a Story Brand, he says if you are speaking and you are positioning yourself in a marketing conversation, this is a sales conversation, you never want to position yourself as the hero. You want to position yourself as the guide. So your story can feature a heroic moment, but it's better if that heroic moment happened for somebody else. Also, you don't want to come across as braggadocious, because that's what happens in stories where you're the hero. You will find yourself as the hero. Oh, and I went through this, and I went through poverty, and I had this happen, and I had this happen, and then I overcame. Or my wife did this, and then I overcame. And I'm strong because I'm a strong person, because I do this. Because of me. It's admirable to a degree, but it's obnoxious if it goes on too long. So you don't want to be the hero of every story. In fact, I'm going to kind of tell you that some of your stories, the best stories, are going to feature you in moments of weakness or moments of clarity, where you recognize something bad that's going on as a result of something you have done. And I try to do this. I don't know to succeed at it, but I try to do this when I'm leading, especially when I'm talking to my team. I'll try to tell them, I dropped the ball on this, or something I did with the campaign, I messed this up. I didn't articulate how important this was. And I want them to know that I have just as much frailty and make just as many mistakes as they do. Definitely, I make a lot more mistakes than my team at the church, but they suffer through it because it's the way it is, and they're gracious. But I'm telling you that it's more valuable that your team sees you as being real. So some stories that you might want to think about: a time you messed up, a time that you misunderstood somebody. Maybe you didn't mess up, but you misunderstood a procedure, a process, a person, any of those 3 Ps. And then finally, a time where you needed help, where you were needy. These are gold. And you can find them. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter what industry you are in. You can find these stories. So don't always be the hero. Next of all, when you are the hero, make it about others. When you are the hero, make it about others. So, I have a rewarding role at times of being a coach and a leader, and I help high-driven, highly ranked professionals communicate clearly. It is a temptation for me to see a communicator who is killing it that I have trained to be like, I did this. No. When we see that in a story form, it looks awful, because you're saying, I'm the one that did all this. Now, what I will say and what you can say is, look, this person came to me. They were struggling with this role. They were struggling with this thing. And blah, 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 blah. And we did this. And through their hard work, they overcame. If you are a coach, none of what you say in that session makes the transformation happen. Do you hear me? If you are a leader, none of what you say in that meeting makes the work happen. Do you hear me? What makes the work happen is the decision your team or your clients make to take action on what you agreed to do. That's what it is. And when you look at things from that lens, you can always make the one who came above and rose above the hero. You don't have to be the hero. Make it about them. Emphasize, if you are the hero, like if you came in and they talked to me for 20 minutes, and then talk about the process of how they healed. Here's what happened as a result of them working through these issues. Now, I'm going to use an example that's off business. Let's say, I'll use counseling. Let's say you're a therapist or a coach, whatever, counseling. and you're dealing with a couple. I've dealt with a lot of these couples that are in infidelity recovery. They're on the edge of divorce. They have little kids. He has a girlfriend. She has a boyfriend, blah, blah, blah. They're on the verge of divorce, and they work with me for 6 or 8 months. Well, it would be tempting for me to say at the end of 8 months that I healed them. I got their marriage back on track. I got them working together. I got them into the Lord, and look what I did with them. This is what I did. This is the results of what I did. But in reality, I've coached a lot of people that have had marriage problems and counseled a lot of them. They don't always end up good. Because some of them choose not to do the things that we agreed on in the coaching or the counseling. They don't agree. And they go and do their own thing. Notice I say the things we agreed on because I have to, if you're a leader, you want people to have buy-in in what you're telling them to do, not just compliance, right? So when you look at the failure rate of when people didn't succeed, then you look at the success rate, you have to realize that it's people's work. It's what they do that ends up leading them to the success that everybody wants. So it's not what you did, it's what they did. It's the work they put in. It's the realizations and revelations they had about themselves, whatever the Lord led them to believe. So that's principle number 2. Next, never ever, and we talked a little bit about this, but it's worth its own principle. Never use your stories to brag. Never use your stories to brag. If your story makes you look too good, shorten up the part that makes you look good. Oh, I bought, 17 cars that year, and I had this, and I did this, and I was able to pay off all my debt, and I was able to put all my kids through college, and I was able to. You want to minimize that because it discourages people that aren't doing as well. And also, they look at you as on a different level. And it's okay to a degree. Sometimes you might be the hero, and sometimes you have to use stories where you succeed because you're explaining why a process worked or why they should do the thing that you did so they get the results that you got. I get that. But if the story is making the listener feel small instead of making the listener feel empowered, you're doing it wrong. If the story is making the listener feel small instead of making the listener feel empowered, you're doing it wrong. So instead of saying, I have all these cars, I have all these houses, I have beach homes, which I don't, by the way. But if I was saying that, then if they feel like, I'll never get that. I have a mortgage, I have 3 kids, I have a stay-at-home wife, I have blah, 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 blah. And if they feel smaller as they're listening, it's wrong. But if you say, look, I came from a home, I didn't know how to manage money, I have marriage problems, and now, things are going better than I could have ever imagined. I mean, God's been providing for us. And I'm a mess. That's different because now they see that they can be excited about transformation and they get overwhelmed with the possibility of it. So don't use stories to brag. Don't use them to brag. All right? We're doing really good here on time. I'll give you a couple more of these and then we're going to close this bad boy down. Next of all, aim for smaller, ordinary stories over humongous, huge, globe-trotting adventure stories. And I'll give you an example. When I facilitated Dale Carnegie course, there's one of the first assignments, and this is all public, and this is part of their program. But one of the first assignments that Dale Carnegie will make you do is come up with a defining moment, like something where you learned something about yourself that you didn't know. And we leave it open. Dale Carnegie actually called it a childhood incident, where you got to know a little bit more of yourself. And a lot of these stories are really dramatic. And some people have these amazing stories, like healing from cancer, experiencing exceptional loss, starting a business, whatever. Now, I used to put a bigger story as my defining moment example. And then I stopped about 5 years in because what I realized is the bigger my story, the harder it was for people to identify with it. Meaning, if I say, hey, I won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2015, I did not, but let's say I did that. Well, how are you going to feel if you have to come up with a story? Well, I never won the Nobel Peace Prize. So my story that I tell is a story about the first day that I worked for McDonald's. Now, we can all get behind that. We all have a first job story or somebody took a chance and hired me story or a first job interview story. And I keep those floodgates wide open because anyone can identify with feeling really clunky and not know how to do their job on their first day. So if you as a leader are looking for stories, try to avoid I grew a company from $10,000 revenue a year to $250 million. Try to avoid those stories and aim with a story of, this was the day I realized that I never once knew how to budget money. I overdrew my account and I realized I wasn't paying attention to blah, blah, blah. And that little ordinary story, people will identify with that. Something about your kids, something about a grocery store conversation you had. Maybe a time when you tried to work out and you failed, something along those lines. People love everyday stories because they can identify with them. So those smaller stories are often the bigger bang for your buck, so to speak. Next, and we're flying through these, but next principle, you want to pick some sort of framework. Now, frameworks are a dime a dozen. There's millions. You could have ChatGPT give you a framework, but when you tell the story, you want to kind of know what's this all about, Alfie? What's the purpose? And so a good framework is you set up the story. Where were you? When was it? Who were you with? And what's going on? So that's where you're getting like, I'm sitting in my room. It's noon on a Thursday. I'm with my wife. Okay, so you want to ground them in some sort of setup. And then a conflict. What happened? The kids came in and said, Dad, you have to settle a fight, right? So you have conflict. Ooh, I don't want to settle the fight. I don't like when they fight, blah, 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 blah. And you set up the conflict, give them a scenario. And then you do the transformation. That's the third part. What changed? What did you learn? What happened? What surprised you? It's a 3-part framework. There's a million of these. But you want to work it into a framework because you and I have seen someone who gets up to tell a story, and the story leads to probably 10 or 15 other stories. Well, I worked in this convenience store back in 1989, and funny thing about convenience stores, in 1989, they weren't as big as they were in 1999. But what happened was, and I knew a guy who once had a convenience store in 1989, and he closed it up and reopened it in 1999, and now we're 3 stories deep, and we don't even know what you're talking about at this point. So I'm not saying you have to have notes because you know your story, but you have to have a general idea of where we're headed here because otherwise people are going to just think that you tell stories because you're a storyteller. And that's not necessarily a horrible thing, but your storytelling has to serve the people that you're telling it to. If it doesn't, then people are going to get annoyed with your stories and write quick, as they say, if you are a friend of mine from the South. All right. Now, I gave you a lot. And I'm going to give you one final thing. So you're like, okay, so what do I do now, Sam? Do I go and write like 55 stories? Do I start, writing stories for a staff meeting that I'm going to be doing? No. Here's what you're going to do. I'll give you 3 quick tips. Number 1, write down a time that you had a failure. Maybe you sent the wrong resume to somebody. Maybe you did something with your kids, something where you failed. It doesn't have to be like a failure, like I cataclysmically destroyed my marriage and ruined my kid's life. No, but somewhere where you messed up. 2, think of a story when you learned something unexpected. And I can think of like 5 of these right now where you learned something you didn't think you'd learn. Maybe this was like an unconventional way for you to learn something that you otherwise wouldn't have. And then another story, and this will be your 3, tell a story about how you had some sort of a breakthrough. Maybe it was about your health and fitness. Maybe it was about finances. Maybe it was about your career path and you were on one path and you thought you were going this direction, then you ended up going a different path in a different place. Maybe. So think about this and think about how you can use these 3 stories. We could call these your cornerstone stories. You can use them to help communicate better to your team. How you can show that vulnerability, how you can showcase something that you're trying to get them to either stop doing, start doing, or to avoid completely. So if you need help with that, podcast at samuellinton.com. I have some openings up for the end of the year here. I would love to coach you. I would love to coach your team. and we are flying high with all these episodes. And please give us feedback. Please review, rate the podcast. If you hate the podcast and you're just listening to it because you like to be angry, don't rate the podcast. Don't review the podcast. Just forget I exist. We will pretend we don't know each other. But in the meantime, thank you for tuning in to the Sam Linton Show. It's my pleasure to be with you. Shift your mindset. Find your voice. Change your world. We'll see you soon.